Buenos dias. Oh, wow, so much energy. Hola. And you might even, when you are at the point, at the tip to communicate, you may even wave a little hola to your neighbor. Hola. Yeah, there it, hola. And for the most courageous, you might even wave an hola to the further away people. When I'm thinking about knowledge transfer, I also think about this situation around 20 years ago. It was in the 90s when I was more involved in IT. I had this little situation that I was asked by a small financial department, hey, Edwin, we do have our masks here where we fill in our data, but we need one more field. Can you please change our data program? And they gave me a handbook, and that was it. There was nothing else. There was nobody who had ever created this program, this world-famous program, by the way. The title was Knowledge Man, interestingly enough. But nobody knew about this program anymore. This program was somehow used in the 80s. And of course, there was also no documentation about the program, and there was no repository, no data were found. And after 2 days or so, I had to say, well, I'm very sorry. I cannot create a new program for you within 2 days or so. It's just that you have to live with what you have. And I think this happens today also quite often, that we are stuck with some programs. I recently read that, for instance, the banks have this problem, that they do not dare to upgrade their programs because there might be some difficulties, and they wait until the program is not supported anymore. And for instance, the Deutsche Bank, as I have read, they reduced the sum of the programs that they use from around 60 to 45 during the last year. This is a huge success already. And I think we have lots of similar situations that sometimes we are confronted with something and somebody should have known earlier how this was created, and the problem is always, yeah, how can we really transfer this knowledge from today to the future also? Perhaps you know that there are lots of websites during the last decades. It started perhaps with around, in 2000, 17 million. That arose a little bit, and in I think it was 2014. It was the first time that there were more than 1 billion of websites, actually. And of course, I'm also surprising you with all these zeros. You don't have to count them. We forget about this information anyway. There is no necessarily knowledge combined with these websites. If we think about websites as Twitter, for instance, we might ask ourselves, is this knowledge? Probably not. It's more information. Or perhaps it's just spam or something like that. And also when we think about how many people we do meet in these years, how many different things do we get, different to 50 years ago. Just think about the value of global exports, and we see that there are lots of different things coming from across the world to us. It's not only we who are exporting, but it's also that the other countries are exporting their things to us. And of course, we get into contact with more and more people, and we do not know who they are and how we can communicate with them. And for instance, it's also the same in our small communities. This model, for instance, says that in each country we have around 10 different groups, 10 milieus, and one milieu doesn't understand the other milieu. There are those who are very much oriented to values on the left side, and there are not only poor, middle class, rich persons, but as we see, there are 10 different kinds of values. and 10 different kinds of understanding the world. Sometimes, at least in Germany, we also say that we use a kind of filter, and through this filter, we just see our world, how we would like to see it. And of course, we are all living in our little bubble. We just meet the people we like. And if I am somewhere up here, do I really know what it means to talk to people being down here, in that corner, with different values, and also different options to buy and to spend life? Probably not. So this is also another challenge that we have, that we should share our knowledge to other people and also, by the way, listen ourselves to get their knowledge. And some of these challenges you might ask yourself is also, yes, we are always creating new products and new processes, and we are entering new markets, of course. And besides these new tasks that we have with our market, we also have some challenges with our colleagues and our team. For instance, there are these young employees, or there are the mid-career people who want to move a little bit, or also the persons who are going to retire. How are we getting that knowledge from those people who are leaving our team? And so we have a lot of questions, challenges that we encounter every day when we are working together with our team. So this might be the second already invitation for you, that you ask yourself as a director or as a manager or as a team member or simply as a parent. Ask yourself some of these questions. For instance, what is the most important situation? How much might it cost when some of this knowledge is leaving? And just for 1 minute, turn to your neighbor and ask yourself the most important question and share some thoughts with your neighbor now for 1 minute. Here you go. And 10 seconds left. And thank you. Of course, we will not be able to answer all these questions in 1 minute. Of course not. This is just a little engagement. You might know that I'm a trainer, not a speaker. So I like to involve you. And I'm also aware of that I was overwhelming you with a lot of different information right now, with different data, and perhaps not knowledge, by the way. But also, let's calm down a little bit with this thought here. And perhaps this thought is one of the ideas that we should ponder when we are talking about knowledge transfer. And perhaps, and this is what I would like to share with you today, is how can we influence the time so that somebody is going to act a little bit wiser. This is about, can I share some of my knowledge that you are able to act on your own independently and perhaps a little bit into the direction of becoming wise. Steve Trotman, by the way, is one of those authors, book, Teach What You Know, and he's very much involved also in transfer knowledge. I'll come back later on this little book. And so to calm down a little bit, yeah, this is a kind of overview that I would like to share with you about my topic today. There are 4 parts. You have just encountered the first part about, yeah, what is it, what we meet today as information and with data. And on the second part, we will pay more attention to knowledge transfer. How can we start that? How can we organize that? And one of the tools that we might use is mentoring, and that's my main part for today, that I would like to share how we can use mentoring techniques. And especially I would dive deeper into the support of mentors and to share some of the thoughts, how can we improve mentoring, in fact. So this was just the beginning, and I'll go further with the knowledge transfer. What is meant by knowledge? Generally, we might say that it is about, well, there is one person who knows something, and it is about to spread it to another person. Knowledge is considered as not only explicit, but mostly we consider knowledge as something that we can read or see or hear somewhere. So it is outspoken. And as I have started with my little story about this knowledge man database, of course, a lot of knowledge is stored in databases or documents or spreadsheets. When CAMCHAL and I were in contact during the last months, we of course shared a lot of knowledge in terms of spreadsheets and documents, and they are stored now on my computer in a specific folder, and here is the knowledge. Of course, not all. You know what is even more important for me? That is this unstructured email content. I have my local email program, and of course all the emails I get out of the cloud somewhere are on my computer. And the other day there was this problem that my Outlook did not start. All my knowledge about addresses and specifically the emails were not accessible, and I became a little bit nervous. Of course, I had to back up, of course. But on the first hand, it was, this knowledge was gone in all these emails. And I believe that this is so normal also that sometimes we exchange some knowledge and it's not structured and not stored specifically. But perhaps you also know this when you are in a long contact with somebody over months, that there are dozens of different emails, and of course you cannot recall every little detail that might have been clarified 7 months ago. So you use that search for in the emails, and you might get the information out of an email that seemed to be already gone months ago. So this is a kind of unstructured knowledge. Who takes care for that? And of course, on the other hand, we have this tacit knowledge. This is so exciting. That means, of course, there is something in our heads which we never write down, and also something which we never say, because perhaps we are not really conscious about it. We need somebody else to ask me to figure out, oh yeah, okay, and then I know about this and that. So let's be aware of that there are, besides the well-structured information and hopefully also knowledge in databases and spreadsheets, there are some in unstructured documents, and also there is some knowledge that is just in the head. Of course, how do we get that? How do we share that? How you transfer that knowledge in our heads? There is this, you remember the name Steve Trotman? He has a great idea in how can we analyze in our team the knowledge that already exists. So let's start with, yeah, okay, we want to analyze our group members in some are working independently, some are still learning, some are not learning, not developing. And there might even be the risk. And is there perhaps somebody who is able to mentor? Question mark. So let's start with our team, consisting of Carlos, Maria, Pedro, and Eva. And there is this one item, that one dimension that we consider as important in our team. And this, for instance, might be the knowledge about our product. And Carlos and Maria are doing quite well, yeah? Pedro is the new person, he's just learning, and Maria does not really seem to be interested. And another dimension of the knowledge in our team might be the knowledge about the tools, how to use them. And this is quite well known by all the 3 team members except the 4th, the new one, Pedro. He is also not really interested in that. And so on and so on. And we might find out more dimensions of knowledge that is needed in our team. And we define that. And I have just figured out that there perhaps might be these others. For me, it's also important to think about the customers and also about some regulations, perhaps. So we notice now that perhaps this, yes, regulations topic is not so well, whatever, accepted or known in our group. And this might, when we think about it, a kind of risk. Of course, we cannot do this as quick and fast as we are doing it here right now. This might take some weeks or months, depending on the number of dimensions that we want to analyze, and also, of course, depending on the number of participants and members of our group. This might take some weeks. And finally, when we come to this conclusion that there is, a kind of risk about the regulations, we might also decide, okay, I believe, Eva, it's you. I believe. Of course, we'll get into contact with Eva, and then we might figure out, hey, Eva, are you the person who is going to share some knowledge about the regulations? And of course, there might not only be a risk in terms of the dimension that in our team, the knowledge about this specific information about one dimension is not really sufficient. It might also be one person. Yeah, guess who? In this sense, perhaps it's Pedro, who is not so secure in every dimension of our knowledge in our team. So what to do with him? Perhaps the first question is also to talk to him and to ask, what's the reason? Can you share something? And perhaps he says, well, they are all mobbing me. It's just a customer. They are friendly. But the whole group is totally, I really have my difficulties. So I simplify that, of course. So that might be a reason, and then we do not really need a mentor. Perhaps we need more a group therapy or something like that. But in case of that we need a mentor, then we might also ask, in this case, Carlos, who is quite well doing in several dimensions, and perhaps he is going to start his mentoring with Pedro. So this is a kind of analysis, a tool that we can use to figure out what's about the knowledge in different dimensions with our different team members. And then the next question is, so what to do now? We should develop a skill plan. Of course, we should plan somehow who is doing what in which time with which goals and so on. And what I would always suggest is also to be aware of. The first step could be ask questions. So we might learn something about these why, what, how questions. Means that Eva, for instance, might ask Carlos, why do you think we need some of these specific regulations? Or Eva might ask Maria, how do you think we can put that into practice, what we know about these regulations, considering our products? And another question finally to Pedro might be what do you think? What is one of the most important regulations? So the idea is just to exchange again, and Eva, as a mentor, really has to be quite active in asking and developing these questions. And of course, there are more tools. I think one of the most common tools is that we are inquiring and appreciating what already works. We do not have necessarily to change everything. It might also be that we are really focusing on what works. This is, whenever you have heard something about appreciative inquiry, one of the techniques that we figure out what works and how did we do that and what was specifically successful, and we focus on that, on the best practice. Another tool might be, of course, process documentation, and of course we might also have our repositories where we can look further. And this is more or less just a collection of data that can be used, sometimes very successfully. Think about my acknowledgement experience. Another tool which is used is, for instance, the shadowing. Of course, some of the youngsters might ask, so what does he mean by shadowing? And we carefully also have to explain that. Not every single task is possibly be shadowed. So also be very clear about that you define exactly which of these actions that you perform as the mentor can be followed and shadowed by your colleague. Another nice little tool of sharing knowledge might be storytelling. Some of us are really great in telling stories, and they remember what they experienced earlier, and they share their little experience in stories. But mainly what I notice is that, especially at work, we are talking about the facts. Here's the document, and this is the step. Follow the process. And you know what? What I believe is that when I am listening to somebody, that we are not so much interested just and only in facts. But what I would like to know is, so how did you feel when you first did this? How was it for you when you entered my team? How did you succeed in performing with this specific? So the topic is share your personal experience. I also encountered a lot of really serious, well-informed team leaders, and when I asked them to share something personal, this was very exciting, Edwin. Fortunately, and this is what happens normally, is they get a great feedback. The person who is listening to this information speech, this knowledge sharing speech says, oh, I like that, and I especially liked your personal example that you shared with us. But of course, on the first hand, it's really a step to share something personal. But the advice is also use storytelling as one of the tools for your mentoring. And of course, not to forget, there are also some new technologies that we could use for sharing knowledge. The other day, I wanted to change something within my little smartphone. I have never opened that before, but there was probably a kind of battery inside of it. So probably it was also possible to open it. But who could tell me? I had no smartphone doctors around me. So what helps? Of course, YouTube. Do you know YouTube, by the way? Okay. So yes, it helps. There were several different explanations on how to open my smartphone and how to change the battery, not only in Spanish. also in English and fortunately enough in German, so it was very easy for me to understand that. So YouTube and films are some of these nice tools that we could use. And one of the tools that I really recommend is a barefoot video. Just last week, in our trainer and teacher team, we were also developing some of these barefoot video. Barefoot video just means that we are creating a video very easily as if you are walking on the beach barefoot, nothing specific around you. And the point is that with this little video, we can create our small little YouTube videos. So here, for instance, is one example.
En este video vamos a darte consejos para la visualización. Consejo número 1, título legible. Ocupar título, ocupar el espacio y tener colores. Paso número 2, y más imágenes, menos textos. Considerar las imágenes y combinarlas con los textos. Paso número 3, ser conciso y directo. No darse más vueltas de las necesarias. Paso número 4, ir paso a paso, justo como lo hicimos recién. Verás, este papelógrafo muestra colores, imágenes y un paso a paso. Muchas gracias y nos vemos en el próximo video.
Yes, muchas gracias, Diego. So this was Diego's first appearance as a film star. He promised that he had never done that before, and it was so easily created. We just prepared that in around 1 hour. He knew the content already, so the group was just creating the idea, how can we present that, and they were creating all these little visualizations. And then, nicely enough, we had this colleague who also shared the content orally. So I believe that this is also one of the techniques that we can really use YouTube videos. Yeah, okay, of course you can also find him at YouTube. When you Google for YouTube and Edwin Lemke and CAMCHAL, you will find this YouTube. And 3 more. We had 4 groups altogether, 4 presenters who were sharing some knowledge. So this was, in general, how can we approach to knowledge transfer, and I'm more focusing on one tool, one technique that we can use, which is mentoring. And mentoring, generally speaking, is this relationship between equals. And hopefully they are becoming aware. They are figuring out which kind of alternatives we might have to perhaps change what we have been doing so far. And also then finally to take action, of course. Let's do it. And this is, as I've said, something between equals, not necessarily the master and the apprentice, not necessarily. Can you imagine that the apprentice also knows something what the master does not know? We'll come back later on that. So, 2 important questions that we might ask, having in mind that there are different generations and different knowledge between the members of our team. We might also ask ourselves, is knowledge regularly transferred from generation to generation? And is it also allowed to speak out loudly as a young person what I know? And I think this is a kind of culture and a kind of attitude that we have to develop. And we will come a little bit further to some details how we can really, in fact, improve this way of communicating differently. But keep these 2 questions in mind, especially, yes, when you are together with your 5 generations. Sometimes I think, well, it might be that in this team, born in 55, I am the oldest in the room, but this is not always true. There are some people working in some rooms who are older than me, the so-called traditionalists. they might have experienced their early childhood spent in war. Well, me, fortunately enough, just after the war, but still thinking about being in Germany. The Russians are coming, and we don't throw food away. And of course, we don't drink water, because water is unhealthy. It might be spoiled, so just drink tea and milk and rarely lemonade, because that was expensive. And it was just that I was, for instance, nearly 20 years old when I discovered in Switzerland they are drinking water. And they're still alive. How comes? So this is something that I did not learn in my childhood. This was something specific. And also in those days, it was not the information that we should drink so much as today. My grandmother always told me, don't drink that much. You will be sweating. And we don't like that. If you are going to drive with a car, you will not get any drink before, because we don't want to stop in between. This was the information, think about that. And she, of course, was doing the best she could, because she wants a well-educated grandson. And of course, this was different with the Generation X persons. Perhaps they grew up still with the consciousness and awareness of the Cold War in Germany. Still figuring out that there is this 68, the hippie age. Yeah, that's when they were growing up. Perhaps the Generation Y. They grew up with E.T. This was the first hero in history for the little kids in the 80s, perhaps. And Star Wars. Well, this is still famous today. And also thinking about the Gen Zers, the new persons, the youngsters, they might have been growing up with the first consciousness of 9/11. So they are always threatened by terrorists, having this in mind. Oh, that was the same perhaps as with the baby boomers, because they consciously noticed, at least in Germany, that we had these terrorists, just a few, not comparable to today, but the media were really full of all these terrorists in Germany. And of course, what might be the difference in terms when I said that I was born after the war and we were still looking for food and for water? No, not then. That this is totally different to those who were growing up in the 90s, perhaps, because then our richness, our abundance was still growing. And by the way, I believe it's still growing today. Just that media tells a lot of, oh, there are so many difficulties. But this is also depending on that we get information from all over the world. But now, during the last years, there's also this growing consciousness of, well, we cannot take so much from this world. We are really exploiting it, and we are taking much more than the world itself is producing. This might be one of the thoughts that young people have now when they are growing up. So I believe that they are getting more and more conscious about this topic, how to save the world, in comparison to previous times. And of course, I'm just sharing some of these thoughts. We also know that baby boomers are famous for being workaholic. They want a career. And we also know that young people prefer a balance of, well, a little bit of work and a little bit of fulfilling lifestyle. And then the older people, and this is what I hear quite often, is, oh my God, they are not working. They are not listening. In fact, for me, it's sometimes remarkable, let's say remarkable, when I'm sitting in a group with different generations, and all of a sudden it somehow pops up that some of the older persons say, well, yes, I had my values, I still have them, but I can't follow them because this youth is totally different. And sometimes, you know, Edwin, I wish my old times back. And I think this does not work. And of course, I wonder, when I'm listening to this older generation complaining about the days today, that the youngsters are very politely listening to what the elder people say. And my experience is that they don't say anything, they are just listening. My interpretation is that they still have a lot of respect for the older generation, but the older generation is really devastated. And again, I do not believe that the old times may come back. Have you ever heard that in evolution, that somebody said, okay, let's go back to the cave? There is this river, plenty of fruit on the other side, but the water is too cold. Let's stay here in the cave. No, we don't do that. So I think we really will proceed further and further, and it's our task somehow to share this knowledge so that we can really adapt to the new challenges that we are encountering. So it's quite difficult to get the old good times back. So how can we do that a little bit further? I think, for instance, it's very important to think about something that is reverse mentoring, not only peer mentoring, but also reverse mentoring. And this is a specific description of, well, it's not only the old person who is sharing some knowledge with the young person, it also might be different, that the young person knows something about how to change the battery in the smartphone, for instance. One advantage might be, and I think this is also very important when I'm just back in my old times, that I have to share what are you talking about, young guy? We might attract clients from the outside who are not only interested in the old back times that I prefer, but we attract clients because they also see that we offer something which is more appropriate to the youth. Or another advantage is that when we are offering something new, that of course we also get new talent because they are interested in what they can share with us, what they can give and what they can get with us when we are talking about new knowledge. And hopefully not so many young people are leaving because they are attracted. And also, and just think about how much it costs when our very well-skilled worker are going somewhere else and leaving our company. We don't want that. And finally also, there might be a smooth change of leadership when knowledge is transferred from both directions, from generation to generation. So there are quite a lot of, just a few, which I have mentioned here, advantages that we have when we are paying attention to, well, old man, listen to the young person. So this was something about mentoring. I promised that I would share something specific about the tool mentoring as how to transfer knowledge. And so let's get a little bit closer to how can we practice this mentoring? How can we improve this communication? At least you might have heard two facts. One is, yes, please ask questions as why, what, and how, so that we learn what the other person says and knows. And also, when we have asked this question, please listen. Listen means listen. Listen does not mean ask questions. Listen does not mean, okay, I know. Listen does not mean that I'm thinking about the answer while you are still not finishing your point. Listen means, okay, what are you saying? I'm listening and I'm with you. So these are the two little things that I already mentioned previously. Perhaps one of the most important headline is foster curiosity. It's not to be able to answer the question as fast as possible. No. First is understand your partner and be curious about what he says. And perhaps to figure out what's the vision in our team and to point out this is your role seems to be very normal. Nevertheless, I believe it is very, very important that we have really the time also to share our common vision, to work on it, to develop it. Not given by the boss. I mean, talking and creating our vision within the team. Yeah, this might be quite easy to understand. Something which I have already mentioned is this, yeah, let's think about how to enable a multi-general communication. And something more specific is also to create a sense of joy and curiosity. Oh yeah, say that again. Let's try. What do you mean by this? Questions like that, instead of saying, okay, I know that. We've done that before. That doesn't work. We've never done that. So we say what I know. No, please not. Be curious. And one of the important points of creating conversations of trust is to be aware of that we are perhaps connecting instead of judging or responding. This is also an interesting thought, talking about trust. Let's come back to evolution and living in our caves. In those days, of course, it was very important that we pay attention to what happens around us. Is the saber-toothed tiger close? Where does this noise come from? So evolution has made sure that we are firstly also paying attention to what is happening around us. And of course, evolution still stays with this today. That means most probably when we meet a foreigner whom we have never seen before, we will firstly, well, not have this attitude, but we will pay attention to what is she saying. Is she threatening me? Is there any danger? And if you want me to change, no, I stay with what I have. Of course, I'm also confronted by changes and news and differences, because perhaps I'm forced to do something which I don't like and which might do me some harm. So, and the interesting thing is that this is not just a philosophy or a description of my mood. This is also that nowadays we can really describe that there are chemical processes who are, in these situations, possibly to be observed, that keep us alert. Whereas when finally we come to a situation, okay, I know her now, she is not doing any harm, I feel very comfortable, I trust the situation, that there are different chemical processes. We become more open. We are ready to somehow to change. And these chemical processes really make it possible that we can develop and that we can transfer knowledge. So be aware of that, how important it might be that we really connect and build this feeling and this culture of trust. So how can we do this now? Judith Glaser describes that very nicely in her book, Conversational Intelligence. She says that our work will change and develop when we are really ready to change. Coming from a situation where we are more or less depleting the whole situation, we might come up to another where we are nourishing, the relationship. Which means it starts, for instance, with words like we are judging, we are limiting, this doesn't work, we are knowing, oh yeah, well, and criticizing. You know, what you have done there doesn't work at all. This happens very often in our communication style. I know that in some regions in Germany it is also said, when I'm not criticizing, this is appreciating enough. But our task is, of course, totally different. We have to nourish our relationship. So think about that we can celebrate. Okay, we have had a success. This was well done. Let's have a cup of coffee. Or also, let's have a glass of champagne, whatever suits to the success and the celebration ceremony. And we might also have this mood of, yeah, I want to discover that. What do you mean? Please explain a little bit further. Share with me. What do you think about this fact? Tell something more. Let's discover the options that there are in these situations. Or also, let's expand. Let's try something new. Let's do it. Let's expand the situation and the options that we might have so that finally we are also coming into the situation that we might say, okay, this was great. Well done. Thumbs up. And of course, there are different ways of appreciation, which I will share with you in a couple of seconds. But firstly, just become aware of how important it is also to be aware of that there is this change within our thoughts. I like this little story or this consideration. Okay, we might all start with a specific thought. And please, I all invite you to decide your thoughts in terms of, yeah, let's nourish our thoughts and our situation. It's your decision. What do you want to think? And the point is, when you start to think, of course, you will also say and use your words depending on what you think. And those words will be put into action, and you will be active in terms of what you are saying. And then, of course, it continues with your action are, of course, becoming your habits, and it forms your character. Unfortunately enough, this character is also influencing our destiny. So think about when we are going back to the first thought, you are deciding your destiny. So which one do you want? Well, let's think about the upregulating words and culture and thoughts. And I would like to go a little bit deeper into this appreciation topic. Because what I often experience in my seminars is when I'm working together with managers or also with teachers, they say, okay, yes, I'm appreciating, I'm saying thank you. And the other says, okay, I invest a little bit more time. I also say hello every morning to every person. And the third goes, oh, I invest even more time and I shake hands to everybody. No, this doesn't work. Yes, it works. And so they discuss, and finally it comes out that there are these common ground, basic rules, and still people are not really aware of what they can do further about how to appreciate. And fortunately enough, there is this one model which is talking about the 5 languages of appreciation. So one, for instance, is, as you see here, that we might just share a little gift. Okay, let's see. I also have some little gifts for you, brought from Germany. I'm living in Bonn, do you know that? Haribo is living in Bonn. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. So it is very easy also. It doesn't have necessarily to be a necklace, of course not. Probably this is also against ethics. But just think about some little things like this, bringing in coffee to show your appreciation. Well done. And of course, another language might be spend quality time with your partner, with your team. Invest in something as a personal situation where you share something about not only business, but also perhaps something personal behind. Not always every person wants to talk about something personal behind, so just listen. I believe quality time is very much depending on our ability to listen. So I invite you for your next appreciation language and use some quality time. And we have already been speaking about, yeah, thumbs up, well done. We do not have necessarily to give a precise, huge sandwich feedback as affirmation. You have done that very well and so on. But it can just be a brief also, yeah, I've seen your effort during the last days. Great, thank you for that. Could be a very little affirmation. Coming to the fourth language, there might be some of us who are really interested in giving help or others who like that they get some help. It's just that we explain something or that we do a little part of their work or that we help them in getting a coffee or filling in that spreadsheet, whatever you like, but offer your help. This is the so-called fourth language that I've mentioned so far. And just also think about that. These languages of appreciation are much easier to learn than Spanish. It's easy. And of course, it also means, this nice metaphor of language, we do not necessarily and genuinely speak all the 4 languages, 5 languages. We don't do that. But perhaps as a leader, or if we want to expand our options, our possibilities, our capacities, we are also speaking another language for the sake of our partner. I might not be the person who is saying thank you, affirmation, thumbs up, but think about it, that there are, of course, some of us who are more or less involved in that language and that they really enjoy that. Whereas, you know, I really like the 5th language. Some of us do not like the 5th language. I am totally convinced about it. But I also remember that one of the clients that I was talking to and talking about the ways how to appreciate, and when I was firstly introducing to what I'm going to say, the boss said, "Oh no, not this. We don't touch. That's dangerous. Forget about that." Of course, I'm aware of that in these days of Me Too, we are always close to sexual harassment. That's very valuable also, this discussion, no doubt about that. And still, I also observed this very naturally in my groups and my teams, that they are giving high five, or that they are using this fist somehow in a friendly way. That's a physical touch. What I also appreciate here in Chile is that people are very easily greeting with hands or even this cheek-to-cheek touch. Great, that's touching. I mean, we know that we as human beings are really depending on physical touches. As a baby, for sure, we will not develop if we do not get any physical touches. So do that. And it might, of course, not only be this high five, it might also be a clap on the shoulder. And if it is appropriate, you might even briefly hug the person. There are these stories also from people who say, I get that prize, and you know what was the most exciting for me? I liked it so very, I was so honored. He took me in his arm. just think about that this is also one way of appreciation, besides our conversational intelligence. So you might read one of these books about, for instance, it was about the analysis from Trotman, or a little bit about the mentoring from Blanchard. There is this nice book about conversational intelligence, and finally you might also find a nice collection about appreciation, which my wife and I have collected. So here is my last task for you, also referring to these 4 books that we have mentioned, which is, well, yes, first, give structure. Analyze the knowledge in your team. Think about the analysis and the risk definition, and also how to figure out who might be the mentor in your team. Structure that. Then plan action. Activate your group and your team members and start to ask questions. The third step might be, think about your conversational IQ. It's not only about emotional IQ, it's also about conversational IQ. Use the chemistry inside of your body and create a situation of trust. Connect with your partners. And finally, also think about to use different appreciative languages so that you can really developing your nourishing situation. So here's the question for you, last task. Turn to your neighbor again and ask, what is the most interesting step for you, the most appropriate step that you will take next week? Go on now. What's the most interesting step for you? Again, this was one of the questions that you will probably not be able to answer within this 1 minute. Thank you for your active participation. You are very much invited to think about these thoughts and questions also after my little part. So, to repeat that, this was my sharing knowledge with you, a little bit about what is knowledge at all, how can we transfer it. Think about mentoring. And especially think about how you can use your support. How can you perhaps use conversational intelligence? And it reminds me at this point sometimes at the end of my seminars, when we have been actively and constructively been working together, and we have created and experienced a lot of different results and feelings and emotions, and also for sure results. And then this question comes, yeah, Edwin, this was so nice, but what about the real world outside? Does this work, what we have been talking about here? And then I go, hey, think about that. We have not only been talking about this, we also experienced this conversational intelligence, this trust, this situation of being able to work together creatively here in this room during the last days. So what do you think? This was not real? Was this a dream? No, it is real. It is possible. Of course, I am aware that in this room in which we were working is really safe and we are sheltered. But still, of course, we can also go out of this room and be active and initiate something. Perhaps you know this story of the jellyfishes which are laying along the beach, and when you take one and throw it into the ocean, it might seem that there is no difference because there are plenty of other jellyfish laying on the beach. It may seem as if it doesn't make a difference. But of course, if you take another jellyfish and throw it into the ocean, You might be sure that it makes a difference for this jellyfish. So that's why I like to invite you to also throw your little jellyfish into the ocean and be active, and let's make a little difference together. Muchas gracias.